Hello and welcome to Amoeba Savant. My name is Naylene Jones and I will be reading to you here. I wanted to go live, but YouTube is making me wait 24 hours, so we shall wait. But in the meantime, I wanted to record something. I may or may not post it. We'll see. I was thinking about starting with the brothers Karamazov, but then it's so long and I wanted something that I could complete. Then I was thinking, well, The Great Gatsby, I haven't read it yet. It's definitely not as thick, but still probably too long for first video. And then I thought I'd read some fairy tales, but I'm using them to boost up my laptop right now. And then looking through my bookshelves, I stumbled upon this book that I found at an airport, and I've only read the preface of the book, and it's brilliant. I love it. It's called Simplexity by Jeffrey Kluger, and I'm just going to read the preface. The subtitle is The Simple Rules of a Complex World. And let's get right to it. Prologue. London, 1854. To anyone paying attention on the morning of 29 August, the death of the little girl at 40 Broad Street did not seem like a terribly remarkable thing. Not many people in the London neighborhood where the girl had lived even knew her name, small children being something of an overstocked commodity in so overrun a place as Broad Street. Indeed, it's entirely possible no one outside the child's immediate family would have learned of her passing at all, had it not been for the way she died. The violent intestinal spilling that was the unmistakable signature of cholera. Let the cholera bug alight, even briefly, and a single baby at a single address was not the only one who would die. Cholera, the neighbors knew, would spread quickly, but it would also spread unpredictably. Unlike influenza, which could travel by air, seemingly to bring down whole blocks in a single infectious sweep, cholera was choosy. It would tap some members of a household and spare others, strike one home on a block and leap over the next. The disease would sweep wide, of that there was no doubt, but in what direction and with what rhythm was impossible to predict. The Broad Street case broke free just as fast as people feared it would. By the very next day, dozens of Londoners in the 70-block area surrounding the girl's address had seized up with the illness. The following day, the plague claimed 100 more people, all in the same febrile quarter. The day after that, 141 more victims were struck, nearly all of whom either quickly died or seemed certain to do so. An unusually ferocious case of cholera was clearly on the loose, and though for now it seemed content to busy itself with the people in a single working-class ward, it would not be contained there for long. If it was going to be controlled, it would have to be stopped at its source. John Snow, a 41-year-old physician who lived near the blighted quarter, thought he might know how. Snow was already well acquainted with cholera. 5 years earlier, a similar, if smaller, outbreak had struck near the London wharves, and he had been called in to treat the young sailor in the Bermondsey neighborhood who had been the first to fall ill. Snow was too late to save the man, and indeed was unable to save the next occupant of the sailor's modest rooming-house quarters either, who moved in after the stricken man had died and soon grew sick himself. Snow examined what the men had in common. They had breathed the same air in the same small house, but so had the other residents, and they had remained well. They had never shared a meal, nor was there any suggestion that they'd even dined in the same restaurant or public house. They'd used the same bed at different times, and it was always possible that the first man left behind a trace of disease that the second man had acquired, though subsequent residents of the room had remained healthy. Then, too, it was always possible that the two dead men had drunk the same water. London neighborhoods had for some time been well plumbed, outfitted with public pumps that provided unlimited supplies of water for washing, cooking, and drinking. The Bermondsey neighborhood, where the sailor had died, was no exception, nor was the 70-block area where the Broad Street cholera was now raging. The entire quarter had no fewer than 7 pumps, as well as 2 more just outside its borders. As was the custom in London, people grew picky about the pumps they used, not always preferring the one closest to their homes, but the one that produced water whose taste was most to their liking. One member of a household might simply step to the corner to draw a dipper of water, while another might walk several blocks away. If there was any disease teeming in the waters that fed one pump and not another, it would be the people drinking from the fouled one who would get sick first. And the London plumbing had plenty of reason to grow foul. As many pumps as there were in all the London neighborhoods, there were far more cesspools, 200,000 of them by the middle of the 19th century. There was a time when the pools were kept surprisingly clean, their contents regularly drawn out as a handy source of fertilizer for the farms still located in and around the city. The money that the sewage sales brought in was used to maintain the brickwork that lined and sealed the pools. Over time, however, the farms migrated farther and farther from the city, and the farmers purchased their fertilizer deeper and deeper in the country. With no one regularly draining the city cesspools and no funds to maintain the immersed brickwork, the masonry seals began to fail, and the contents of the pools began to seep into the nearby water supply. Somewhere in the sickly 70-block quarter, Snow suspected, there was a diseased pool fouling a pump. Shut down that pump, and you might stop the contagion. On 2 September, 4 days after the epidemic began, Snow took to the streets. As dozens more people continued to fall ill every few hours, he began calling on the houses of those already dead and those freshly stricken to find out how many people lived in each home and which ones had drunk their water from which neighborhood pumps. The mother who lost her daughter at 40 Broad Street normally used the closest pump, which was just outside her door and only 3 feet from a neighborhood sewage pool. She didn't regularly drink the water that flowed from it, but she did use it to rinse and soak her daughter's diapers. Other people who lived near her also frequented the Broad Street pump, but still others preferred the ones at Bridle or Warwick or Rupert Streets. Snow inked all the names and addresses of all the people he interviewed into a ledger and then drew up a map, with spidery lines connecting the houses of the well and the stricken to the site of the pumps that provided their water. In home after home, he noticed that while the odd victim or two couldn't remember where they'd drawn their water, almost every one of the other people felled by the disease had made it a point to seek out Broad Street water. Over the week, as the death toll crossed 400, then 500, Snow continued his canvassing, ranging farther and farther from Broad Street out to the cobbly alleys and avenues where the disease was at its weakest. He stopped in at a neighborhood jail where 500 inmates were kept in frightful conditions, yet only 5 had contracted cholera, due perhaps to the fact that the building had its own well. He stopped in at a nearby brewery, where workers were given a generous ration of fresh beer each day, sparing them the need to sip much from any of the pumps. No one there had gotten ill. Finally, on 7 September, when the death toll had reached nearly 600, Snow demanded and received an audience with the Board of Guardians of St. James Parish at the vestry hall near his home. Ledger and map in hand, he appeared before the committee and told them plainly that the Broad Street pump was the source and center of the recent contagion. Disable it, and the plague would be stayed. The guardians demurred. One pump causing so much suffering in so broad a range, they asked. Yes, Snow explained, and handed over his evidence. The men studied the material and remained unconvinced. Eventually, however, perhaps to appease the anxious doctor, perhaps because there were so many other functioning pumps in the ward, that the Broad Street residents would not be too inconvenienced if theirs was shut down, the guardians agreed to Snow's recommendation. The next day, a workman, was sent to the offending pump, heavy mallet in hand. He took several clanging swings at the fittings holding a handle in place. The metal peg popped free, and the handle itself clattered to the street, rendering the pump useless. That day, only 14 people fell newly ill. The following day, the number dropped further still. Within a few more days, the dying stopped, and the disease was beat. John Snow knew nothing of the modern science of epidemiology. No surprise, since it was a science that did not yet even exist. But he knew about diseases, and he knew two things about them. Plagues were fantastically complex things, with the illness working myriad horrors in the body and spreading across the landscape in myriad ways. But diseases moved through simple choke points too. One person's handkerchief, one person's handshake, one handle on one fouled pump. All of them bottlenecks in the pathogen's flow. Seal off even one of those, and you could stop the disease cold. The complex illness could collide hard with the simple fix, and on this day, at least, it was the simple fix that held its ground. To anyone bothering to pay attention, it doesn't appear that anything particularly remarkable is going to happen when the M. Coy bookshop in Seattle opens its doors for business in the morning. It's a big, roomy place, but an inconspicuous one too, a store you have to look for along the brick-paved stretch of Pine Street that spills down to the farmer's market. Those who have patronized the place know it's been here for a while now, 18 years or more, run all that time by business partners Michael Coy and Michael Brasky. Coy and Brasky keep careful track of their books, stocking about 15,000 titles at any one time. Counting multiple copies of popular books, that comes out to about 20,000 volumes in all, most of which appear to be on display. 20,000 books is an awful lot if you're two men running a single shop. Though to a vast book chain with outlets around the world, that same 20,000 would be a mere rounding error, perhaps the amount left in loading dock crates at the end of the day to be unpacked in the morning after the early shift arrives. When the doors of the shop on Pine Street open a little before 10 a.m., no one comes in at first. Then a pair of browsers arrive, then a singleton, then a group of three. And Coy and Brasky go to work. Following the meandering customers with their eyes, they note who stops where, who pauses at which shelf, who picks up a book and puts it down quickly, who picks up another one and gives it more attention. They notice the shoppers who keep glancing at their watches, the ones likeliest to have stopped in to burn 10 minutes on their way to somewhere else. They notice those who move more slowly, the ones for whom the store was destination, not a transit point. They notice which customers have been here before and which ones are newcomers. The proprietors gather those stray scraps of information and, as other customers wander in, go panning for more. A youngish woman stops at a wall of children's books. If she's wearing a wedding ring, she may be a mother familiar with what's on offer. If no ring, maybe she's an aunt or a family friend who needs some help. The owners spot connections between two books that attract a single shopper, a period novel set in an artist's studio and a coffee table book about famous painters. Maybe something there, maybe not. They remember which books repeat customers have bought in the past, recall other customers who have bought the same book, and look for still more books they both might enjoy. They throw out information that would only confuse things. People who ask for books to be gift-wrapped don't count. They're buying for someone else's tastes, not their own. But a year from now, when the same birthday or anniversary comes around and the same customer returns, that information might become useful. Coy and Brasky stir all these thoughts together, adding this or that odd detail or this or that strategy from a lifetime spent bookselling, and do it all instantly. Tiny synapses flashing, signals among billions of neurons, summoning up volumes of experiences stored all over the brain. Then they approach a shopper with the most important thing they have to offer, a recommendation, a suggestion for a single one of the 20,000 volumes they keep on their shelves. Sometimes the customers don't like the idea, but more often they do. Between 60 and 100 times a day, the cash register rings and a sale is recorded, meaning that more than 500,000 books have gone out the door over the course of 18 years. It's called book sense, says Brasky. You get a feel for what sells, for what people like. Then you offer it to them. In another part of Seattle, not far from the store, people are acquiring book sense too. But they're not doing it in a one-story shop on a brick-lined street. They're doing it in the 1927 Art Deco tower that was once a private hospital and is now the worldwide headquarters of Amazon.com. Amazon has a few more books than Brasky and Coy. They don't say precisely how many, but they acknowledge that tens of millions starts to get at it. They have 21 warehouses around the world to store that mountain of merchandise, along with all the other products: movies, clothing, jewelry, toys, cameras, tools, sports equipment, kitchen supplies their customers buy. They also have big computers, a lot of big computers, but they keep even quieter about those, saying nothing about how many they own, how the network is set up, or especially about where they keep them all. They'd be a target. Company spokesman Andrew Herdner says, simply, leaving the matter at that. The Amazon folks are plenty open about what their computers do, however. Log onto the site and you've walked into their store. As you do, the computers keep an eye on you. They see where you click, they see where you linger, they know if you start to buy something but decide against it before you complete the sale. They remember what you've bought before and what other people like you have bought. They cross-index those millions and millions of customers and tens of millions of sales and look for what overlaps. They, too, find the hidden connections in seemingly unconnected books, the Tuscany tucked deep in a novel you bought, and the Mediterranean travel guide you consider the next week. They, too, know to ignore the confounding junk. Throw a Harry Potter book in with your purchase, and the computer's memory will likely throw it right out. Everyone buys those, so they tell you nothing. The computers are there for the same reason Brasky and Coy are, to make recommendations, to offer a single book or an entire reading list that you in particular would be likely to enjoy. They sift uncountable billions of data bits too. However, the computers don't do it at 1,400-gram walnut-wrinkled mass of neural tissue and myelin, but in giant mainframes and hidden hangars concealed around the world. The bookstore owner's brain is not as large as everybody's collective brains, says Scott Ruthfield, an Amazon software manager. We try to get humans out of the equation. Humans think they're experts and try to guess the patterns, but they're usually wrong. The likes of Coy and Brasky don't think they're wrong, and they're not just in the equation. They are the equation. What the Amazon computers do is by any measure remarkable, just as remarkable as the celebrated chess-playing computers that can humble even the world's most gifted human players. But in both cases, the machines aren't parsing data as much as steam shoveling it, digging up vast masses of information and pulverizing it finer and finer until they come up with a single relevant grain. The likes of Brasky and Coy do the very same thing, but finely, instantly, microsurgically. It's easy to say that one of the two approaches is more complex than the other. It's a lot harder to say which one. Complexity, as any scientist will tell you, is a slippery idea, one that defies almost any effort to hold it down and pin it in place. Things that seem complicated can be preposterously simple. Things that seem simple can be dizzyingly complex. A manufacturing plant with its clanking machinery filling acres and acres of hangar-sized buildings may be far less complicated than a houseplant, with its microhydraulics and fine-tuned metabolism and dense schematic of nucleic acids. A colony of garden ants may similarly be more elaborate than a community of people. A sentence may be richer than a book, a couplet more complicated than a song, a hobby shop harder to run than a corporation. Human beings are not wired to look at matters that way. We're suckers for scale. Things that last for a long time impress us more than things that don't. Things that scare us by their sheer size strike us more than things we dwarf. We grow hushed at, say, a star, and we shrug at, say, a guppy. And why not? A guppy is cheap, fungible, eminently disposable, a barely conscious clump of proteins that coalesce into a bigger clump, swim about for a few months, and then expire entirely unremarked upon, quickly decomposing into the raw chemicals that produced it in the first place. A star roars and burns across epochs, birthing planets, consuming moons, sending showers of energy to the limits of its galaxy. Yet the guppy is where the magic lies. A star, after all, is just a furnace, a vulgar cosmic engine made up of 3 layers of gases that slam hydrogen atoms together into helium, release a little light and fire in the process, and achieve nothing more than that. It may last for billions of years, but to what animating end? A guppy, by contrast, is a symphony of systems: circulatory, skeletal, optical, neurological, hematological, metabolic, auditory, respiratory, olfactory, enzymatic, reproductive, biomechanical, behavioral, and social. Its systems are assembled from cells. Its cells have subsystems. The subsystems have subsystems. And if so elegant an organism lives for no more than a handful of months, what of it? Admire the fireball star if you must, but it's the guppy we ought to praise. Across all the disciplines, chemistry, physics, astronomy, biology, economics, sociology, psychology, politics, even the arts, investigators are making similar discoveries, tilting the prism of complexity in new directions and seeing the light spill out in all manner of unexpected ways. Listen to an economist talk about a pencil. There is nothing to recommend a pencil as a remotely interesting thing. Its design is crude. Its materials humble. It operates, to the extent that the word can be used at all, by an act no more sophisticated than scraping. You could do as much with a scorched bit of charcoal and a flat stone wall. And yet a pencil, by almost any measure, is an exquisitely complex thing. Somewhere in a harvested forest was the stand of cedar trees that gave up their wood to provide the pencil's dowel. Somewhere in the Jamaican interior is the bauxite mine that provided the raw material for its little aluminum sleeve. Somewhere in the coal belt is the mine that provided the lump carbon for the graphite. Still elsewhere is the lab where raw polymers were cooked up into rubbery erasers. And to those places that provided those things streamed still other things, the smelting ovens for the metal plants, the autoclaves for the rubber labs, the blades for the sawmills, the backhoes for the carbon mines, the cotton to dress the lab workers, the bacon to feed the lumberjacks, the paymasters and truck drivers and box packers and shipping managers to keep all of the operations humming. An immense industrial machine rises up, switches on, and at its far end spits out a pencil, arguably one of the most complicated objects in the world. Psychology is waking up to complexity too. The 6-child family may be an impossibly complicated thing with all of the lunches to be made, clothes to be bought, and homework assignments to be checked. But it may be the 1-child family in which a smaller number of relationships play out in a more nuanced way that is the truly complex one. The single small mind of a single small child may be similarly more layered than it seems. A toddler walking down a sidewalk holding a toy in one hand unthinkingly switches it to the other so he can reach up and take hold of his mother before he crosses a street. But that apparently simple act is wonderfully complex, requiring the child to know a lot of things about streets. They're dangerous. His mother, she expects him to hold on, his grip. He can't hold both his mother and his toy at the same time. And gravity. Let go of the toy without changing hands first and it will fall to the ground. Political science plays the simplicity-complexity game too. Vast ideologies turn on simple ideas. Nazism on hate, democracy on consent of the governed, communism on the selflessness of the human spirit and the perfectibility of the marketplace. One idea may be ugly, one inspired, one badly flawed, but they're not hard to describe. Equally surprising and counterintuitive is the science of the stock market, where millions of blind and self-interested traders somehow settle on a fair value for tens of thousands of different companies. The science of crowds, in which terrified or rage-blind mobs do cunning and ingeniously adaptive things, usually without being aware they're doing it at all. Geology, in which the simple chemical rules of rocks are increasingly seen to mirror the complex chemical rules of biology. Manufacturing and marketing, in which enormous operations like industrial farms are humbled in the face of the mere greengrocer who handles not just a handful of products but thousands, all of which have to be shown and sold or moved and junked within the knife-edge margin that spells the difference between profitability and bankruptcy. Art, in which jazz is no longer seen as mere music, but a living example of a complex adaptive system, and Jackson Pollock abides by not merely the laws of artful abstraction, but the laws of fractal geometry. Even presidential politics are remarkable for the complexity tucked in their simplicity, as whole administrations stand or fall or aren't born at all based on nothing more than a few chads in Florida, a piece of tape on an office door in Washington, a helicopter burning in an Iranian desert. Trying to distill all of this down to a working definition of just what simplicity is and just what complexity is has always been difficult. Perhaps simple things are those things that create order in their environments, the way, say, modern design strips the clutter from a building, but complex things create order too, the way the cogs and springs and flywheels of a watch yield a single simple piece of data, the time, and the piece of data in turn runs the world. Perhaps it's simple things that create disorder then, the way an under-regulated economy can let markets and monopolies run wild. Or maybe it's complex things that are to blame, the way over-regulating things can produce a Byzantine mess like the tax code. We call some software simple because it's easy to use, never mind the fact that it relies on a hieroglyph code that's numbering in its elaborateness. We call older computers complex because they were hard to use, never mind the fact that by the standards of today's machines, they're flat-out crude. Is freeform dance comparatively simple thanks to its lack of rigid rules, or does that very liquidity make it much harder to learn? Does a committee struggling over a problem lack the straightforward insight of a single wise mind? Or is the wise mind blinkered by its biases, while the committee, with its clarifying tensions, is a better, ultimately less complex arbiter? It's not our fault that we lack a natural ability to tease these things apart. The human brain is a real time machine, one that's designed to scan constantly for input, for clues to the next meaningful thing that's about to happen in our world, and then assemble that information quickly into impressions and actions. In a fast-moving environment, too much contemplation can be a lethal luxury. So instead, we're programmed to notice first the most conspicuous features of a thing and are struck, and sometimes confused, by that quality. We can be misled by beauty, by speed, by big numbers, by small numbers, by our own fear, by wealth, by eloquence, by size, by success, by death, by the unfathomability of life itself. There is a taxonomy of things that mislead us every day, and in so doing help the complex masquerade as the simple, and the simple parade itself as complex. Just how to distinguish one form from the other is something science is only now beginning to understand. And that was the prologue to Simplexity. I hope you liked it as much as I did. I think that is it for this video. Again, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe. I would love that. It would help me a lot, and I will see you next time. I will probably do a fairy tale next. I really want to do Snow White and Rose Red, and then I'll probably dive into a book. We'll see which one. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.